There are agreements that require no words, yet they touch the deepest layers of energy, as if the souls had recognized each other long before the meeting took place. When an empath steps into the life of a narcissist, they have no idea that they are entering a soul contract activated by two opposing energetic frequencies: their soft, radiant, empathic energy, and the other person's heavy, fractured, chaotic field. In that very first moment of connection, the empath feels something strangely familiar, a pull, subtle yet undeniable, that makes them want to understand, to help, to soothe. But that familiarity is not destiny, nor is it soulmate love. It is the resonance of two energetic wounds recognizing each other. And from that moment on, the journey begins. Jung once said that we do not meet people, we meet their energy, and that energy mirrors something within us. For the empath, this mirror awakens the deepest parts of their being: the instinct to heal, the unconditional compassion, the capacity to open their hearts so fully that they can touch another person's pain. They think they are helping a lost soul, but in truth, they are stepping into an energetic realm where light and shadow intersect. The paradox is this: the more light they give, the more they feel themselves being pulled into the other person's emotional chaos. Yet they are also the only one capable of walking out without carrying that darkness with them. This happens not when they leave the relationship, but when their energy shifts, when they recognize which emotions are truly theirs and which are the result of energetic contamination, when they understand that they are not obligated to heal someone who has no desire to heal themselves, and when they finally see the worth of the energy they have given away so easily. In that moment, the soul contract ends on its own. There is no explosion, no drama, only a profound stillness, as if the empath soul quietly steps out of a dark room, returning everything that was never theirs, and reclaiming the energy that had been drained throughout the journey. And the strangest part is this: they do not walk away wounded, but whole in a way they thought they had lost long ago. Part 1. How the empath-narcissist soul contract forms. Every soul contract between an empath and a narcissist usually begins quietly, without dramatic signs or obvious spiritual signals. It starts with an indescribable, subtle feeling, an almost imperceptible shift in the body, a slight change in breathing, or an unusual stillness in the mind when their energies touch for the first time. For the empath, that moment isn't simply seeing a person. It feels like noticing a question they unconsciously want to answer. There is something about the other that makes them pause, not because of a strong impression, but because of a fleeting familiarity, as if they've touched this type of energy before. They don't know where, they don't know when, they just know it feels familiar, has 20, and when their eyes meet, the empath often sees what others don't: the tiny tension beneath the smile, the brief flicker of exhaustion behind the confidence, a subtle emptiness in the gaze that only sensitive people can perceive. They don't see charisma, they see lack. Not because they're eager to save anyone, but because they naturally sense the fractured pieces hiding behind the other person's armor. In that moment when the empath feels that gap, a kind of unconscious agreement begins to form, not through promises or gestures, but through a gentle energetic pull strong enough to create the first thread of connection. It's like two pockets of air at different temperatures, meeting and automatically creating motion. No one intends it, but it happens, and from there, the relationship's momentum begins to unfold on its own. The empath feels a subtle tug, as though an invisible hand touches their shoulder and whispers, "Stay, this person needs you." But this pull isn't the call of love, it is the echo of old wounds within them, wounds that make them feel they must help, must heal, must soothe someone else's pain to find meaning in themselves. This is when the wounded healer archetype inside them awakens, flaring up like a faint lantern suddenly catching wind in the night. For the narcissist, this encounter feels like stumbling upon water in the desert. They are drawn to the empath not because of beauty, words, or behavior, but because the empath's energy field radiates warmth, safety, softness, and spaciousness like a place to breathe. To their empty inner world, the empath feels like a spring that never runs dry, ready to moisten the cracked soil of their psyche. They don't recognize the empath intellectually. They recognize them through an energetic hunger, a craving they cannot explain. They only know that standing next to the empath makes them feel alive. This is where the illusion of destiny forms. The empath feels they understand the narcissist in a way they've never understood anyone. And the narcissist feels the empath sees the best version of them. But all of it is only energetic reflection. The empath mistakes this resonance for a soul connection, while the narcissist mistakes the empath's warmth for an inexhaustible supply. The soul contract seals itself the first time the empath touches the narcissist's hidden pain, and their heart opens like an unlocked door. When they say, "It's okay, I understand," their energy begins flowing into the other person like light slowly filling a dark room. Every act of kindness, every moment of understanding, every emotional fragment the empath picks up becomes a drop of energy, given away tiny at first, but drop by drop a stream begins to flow. The narcissist, with no internal source of emotional nourishment, absorbs every drop like parched earth drinking rain. But dry earth does not feel grateful. It only knows how to consume until the very last drop. And here is where the contract shifts from beautiful resonance to dangerous imbalance. The empath gives because they think they are loving. The narcissist takes because they believe they are entitled. At the energetic level, this bond is not two souls finding each other. It is two frequencies attempting to compensate for each other. The empath pulled by compassion, the narcissist pulled by lack. One carries too much light. The other holds too much shadow, and when light meets shadow, they bind in a very particular way. Shadow does not disappear. It borrows the light to survive. And light, if unconscious, gets pulled in until it forgets itself. Jung once said that whatever is rejected in us will reappear through another person. In this connection, the empath sees their own shadow reflected through the narcissist. Fear of abandonment, need for validation, the tendency to endure in order to keep peace. Meanwhile, the narcissist sees in the empath the light they once lost, sincerity, presence, real connection. This unconscious recognition locks them into one another not through love, but through the attraction of two unhealed forces. The contract deepens every time the empath ignores a small red flag, every time they accept silence, inconsistency, emotional coldness. The contract re-signs itself with a new line of energy. Every time the narcissist controls a bit more, demands a bit more, manipulates a bit more, the cord between them tightens and digs deeper. Eventually, the electromagnetic pull between these mismatched energies becomes so strong, the empath feels unable to leave because they think it's not bad enough to walk away, while the narcissist confidently believes, "This person will never leave me." But the same imbalance that traps them also prepares the empath for awakening. When an empath gives too much light to a place that cannot receive it, their soul begins to cry out. Their energy weakens, dims, and then suddenly changes frequency. And that frequency shift becomes the doorway out, the beginning of the next chapter in their awakening, unfolding in the following part. Part 2. The archetypal attraction, when the empath's light touches the narcissist's unacknowledged shadow. The connection between an empath and a narcissist does not endure simply because of emotions. It persists because of the collision between two opposing archetypes, the unprotected light of the empath and the unacknowledged darkness of the narcissist. When they meet, It is not personality or behavior that takes the lead, but two deep psychological structures beneath consciousness. The empath carries a form of quiet light, stable presence, non-judgmental listening, care without possessiveness. This is the kind of energy that makes others feel strangely safe. The empath does not need to do anything. Their presence alone calms the emotional surface of the other, like a room becoming easier to breathe in simply because they walked in. For the narcissist, this safety is dangerous in a way they never admit. It makes them feel the very parts they insist on hiding: vulnerability, deprivation, the fear of being truly seen. The empath doesn't know this. They only sense a contracted energy, like someone holding something fragile without knowing how. In that contraction, the empath senses both a cry for help and a push for distance. This mixing of energies is what deepens the contract. The empath feels the urge to lift. The narcissist feels both need and fear of being lifted. The archetypal level activates when the narcissist realizes the empath sees them in a way no one else does, without admiration, without fear, and without being easily deceived. The empath looks straight through the facade and touches the emptiness the narcissist tries to hide. It is not a judgmental gaze, it is a truthful one, and this both attracts and terrifies the narcissist. They are drawn in because the empath's light exposes what they hide, and they are frightened because that light threatens to shatter the mask they built their entire life. Jung called this the awakening of the shadow, when the presence of another forces our darkness to surface, whether we want it or not. To the narcissist, the empath becomes an unbendable mirror, one they cannot control. This is why they crave the empath, not because of love, but because the reflection temporarily makes them feel full. Yet it is also why they begin to resent the empath. The mirror shows everything they are running from. For the empath, the attraction is not born from possession or control, but from resonance between two opposing emotional frequencies. They feel the unnamed pain inside the narcissist, and in that resonance, they unknowingly step into the role of the lantern bearer, illuminating places the narcissist refuses to look at. But the empath doesn't realize that by doing this, they awaken the narcissist's instinctive defenses. Light reveals darkness, and darkness never reveals itself without resistance. Thus, the attraction is not harmony, it is a unique gravitational pull, like magnets drawn together by opposite charges only to repel the moment they touch. This primordial instability makes the relationship both intense and fragile. The empath moves closer because intuition pushes them. The narcissist moves closer because they need reflection. The empath opens from compassion. The narcissist opens from emptiness. What strengthens the contract most is the moment the narcissist realizes the empath's light can nourish them in a way no other energy ever has. The empath listens without demanding. They understand without mocking. They see the cracks without shaming. For a brief moment, the narcissist feels good enough. To them, this feeling is addictive not because they appreciate the empath, but because the empath's light temporarily blankets the emptiness they are always escaping. For the empath, the purity of their light becomes the fuel that activates the narcissist's energetic hunger. Light attracts darkness, not because darkness is beautiful, but because darkness wants to survive through it. And this is when the empath unknowingly opens the door for the narcissist to enter deeper into their energy field. The paradox of archetypal attraction lies here. The empath believes they see a soul that needs healing. The narcissist believes they've found a limitless supplier. Both see the same thing, but through two different psychological lenses. And that difference creates the first powerful pull: beautiful, dangerous, magnetic, escalating. From here, the contract enters its next stage. The empath gives more than they realize. The narcissist takes more than they should. All of it happens in silence, beneath the surface of daily interactions, while at the energetic level, the cords are tightening. Part 3. The extraction, when the narcissist begins to take the empath's energy. The taking never begins with an obvious action. It starts with very small shifts, so small that an average person wouldn't notice, but an empath feels them clearly in the body long before the mind finds the words. It might be the heaviness in the air when the other person walks into the room, a brief wave of fatigue after a text exchange, or a slight contraction in the chest when the tone of the conversation suddenly changes. The empath doesn't see danger signs, they feel them. And what makes them vulnerable is that they tend to interpret those feelings in favor of the other person. They must be tired. Maybe they're stressed. I should be more understanding. In the very moment, the empath starts explaining the other person's emotions on their behalf. The first energetic pipeline is connected quietly, naturally, but enough for the narcissist to start receiving what they are missing. A narcissist's mechanism of energy extraction is not what most people imagine. They do not actively suck it. They create conditions for the empath to hand it over. And the empath doesn't give because they're forced. They give because they feel compelled to fill a gap the other person has made them see. At this stage, the narcissist begins to drop small hints about their fragility, tiredness, disappointment, pressure, feeling misunderstood, feeling like no one is truly trustworthy except you. These words don't directly take the empath's energy. They open a door that invites the empath deeper into the role of emotional caretaker. An empath doesn't need to be adored. They need to feel that their understanding makes a difference. And the narcissist quickly figures this out. A vague compliment, a half-true, half-strategic line, like, I don't know what I'd do without you, or you understand me in a way no one else does, is enough to make the empath automatically increase the amount they give. They don't realize that each time this happens, they are pumping more energy into a bottomless well. On the energetic level, the extraction begins when the empath lets go of a bit of their boundaries, not through a specific action, but through a softening in their frequency. They begin to feel the other person's emotions as if they were their own. When the other is anxious, the empath becomes anxious in their place. When the other is worried, the empath tries to soothe it. When the other is angry, the empath examines themselves to see what they did wrong. This is the critical shift. The empath starts regulating their own energy in order to stabilize someone else's. And once this happens, the narcissist doesn't have to do much. They just keep behaving in ways that push the empath into problem solving, soothing, and understanding. The narcissist rarely says, "Give me your energy," but their behavior creates scenarios that make the empath feel they must pour energy in. They may overreact to small things, forcing the empath into explaining or calming them down. They may suddenly withdraw, making the empath feel they have to pull them back so they don't get hurt. They may reveal vulnerability and then later deny it, making the empath try even harder to connect. And every time the empath tries to reconnect, a bit more of their energy leaks out. This is how extraction works, not through direct demands, but through unconsciously engineered situations that leave the empath feeling perpetually not enough, not caring enough, not understanding enough, not patient enough, not committed enough. This constant sense of not enough pushes the empath to invest more energy into the relationship, hoping that if they just give a bit more, everything will finally balance out. But for the narcissist, balance never arrives. The more they receive, the more entitled they feel to receive even more. On the energetic plane, the narcissist starts expanding their territory inside the empath's emotional space. They make the empath used to regulating their mood, used to prioritizing their feelings, used to yielding, used to keeping quiet to avoid conflict. Each time the empath does this, the narcissist gains another zone of control. Bit by bit, the empath becomes the one who holds space for emotions the narcissist throws in, often without realizing that those emotions are not their own. The most obvious energy theft happens when the narcissist begins using three unconscious tools: inconsistency, ambiguity, and withdrawal at just the right time. Inconsistency keeps the empath constantly guessing their mood, pulling energy into analysis. Ambiguity makes the empath invest more to find emotional safety. And withdrawal at the perfect moment makes the empath cling to the hope that if I just try a little harder, they'll go back to how they were before. But that before is an illusion. It appears only long enough to keep the empath trapped in this lopsided giving and taking. The painful truth is that the empath doesn't immediately realize they're losing energy. They just feel more tired than usual, more anxious without clear cause, less clear in their intuition, and sometimes no longer recognize themselves. Yet they keep giving because they think they're loving. In reality, they're sustaining an unfair contract they never knew they signed. The extraction escalates to the point where the empath feels they are no longer the central figure in their own life. They care more about the other person's feelings than their own. They put more effort into not making the narcissist sad than into making themselves happy. Their energy begins to orbit around the narcissist not out of respect, but due to an invisible emotional dependency shaped over time. And the narcissist, lacking an internal energy source, feels increasingly powerful seeing the empath revolve around them like this. This phase of the soul contract is the most dangerous. The empath starts confusing exhaustion with love, pain with attachment, anxiety with care. And the narcissist confuses the empath's sacrifice with submission. They believe the empath is there to nourish them, to heal them, to fill them. They believe the empath's energy is an asset they are entitled to access at any time. Once that belief takes root, extraction is no longer accidental. It becomes a pattern. Yet even here, the seeds of awakening quietly form. Because the empath's energy, though gentle and soft, is not infinite. When it approaches its limit, when the exhaustion exceeds what their heart can bear, a shift in frequency begins. That shift becomes the starting point for the next stage. The moment the empath sees the truth and begins reclaiming what is theirs. Part 4. The Awakening. When the empath begins to see the truth. An empath's awakening doesn't come from a dramatic explosion or a cinematic turning point. It usually arrives quietly, like the first faint light of dawn, not bright enough to overwhelm, but enough to make you realize you've been living in the dark for far too long without knowing it. It begins with small feelings that repeat themselves: unexplained fatigue, emptiness after every conversation, the sense of having to work to maintain something that should flow naturally. The empath's energetic field, the most subtle and sensitive part of them, starts sounding the alarm long before the mind understands what's happening. The empath may not name it at first, but they feel their body starting to reject what it once easily accepted. A text message demanding emotional labor feels heavy in their chest. An unexpected call from the narcissist makes their breath shorten. A slight criticism suddenly makes them feel cold inside, as if there's no longer enough warmth in their energy to hold the other person's pain. This is the first sign of awakening. The body no longer wants to be the container for someone else's emotions. At first, the empath thinks something is wrong with them. Am I being too sensitive? Am I becoming cold? Have I changed? They blame themselves more than the relationship. This is natural for empaths, who are used to fixing themselves rather than questioning the dynamics they're in. But when these questions repeat too often, the mind begins to suspect that perhaps the problem isn't who they are, it's the imbalance in how they're relating. One of the most pivotal moments of awakening is when the empath notices that they have changed in ways they never intended. They laugh less, their intuition feels dimmer, their mind is more tense, their emotions no longer feel natural. They begin to notice they are not themselves around this person. Not because love has transformed them, but because they have been constantly bending, shrinking, and contorting to fit into the narcissist's emotional deficits. For the first time, The empath looks in the mirror and sees a version of themselves that no longer shines the way it once did. From there, the first beams of truth start to break through. Maybe I've given too much. Maybe my empathy has become a burden to myself. Maybe this isn't connection, it's dependency. These aren't loud thoughts. They appear in quiet moments when they lie down at the end of the day, when they turn off their phone, when they sit in stillness. These pockets of silence, which used to be the place where the empath recharged, now carry a message they've been avoiding. Their energy is being drained faster than it can regenerate. When the empath realizes this, they begin to observe instead of react. This is a key energetic shift, because the narcissist's power depends on the empath's reactions. An empath who observes is an empath who is reclaiming authorship over their energy. And once the empath moves into observation, they start to notice what they previously excused or ignored. Inconsistencies, subtle manipulation, moments where the narcissist uses silence to make them feel responsible, times when they are pulled into emotions that aren't theirs. True awakening happens when the empath first asks, "Why do I feel guilty when I haven't done anything wrong?" That question is the blade that cuts through the unconscious cord, tying them to the narcissist. It touches the deepest layer of the lopsided giving and receiving dynamic, signaling that the empath is beginning to step out of the emotional maze they were trapped in. Jung said that darkness can only manipulate us as long as we refuse to look at it. And for the first time, the empath looks directly at their own feelings without reshaping them to fit the other person's needs. They realize their energy has become fuel for the narcissist's ego. They see that their love has not been reciprocated, but used. They understand that their empathy has been turned into a tool to cover up what the narcissist refuses to face. This is the moment of awakening, when their light turns inward to illuminate their own path, instead of shining exclusively on someone else's pain. And when the light returns to its rightful direction, the contract begins to crack. The unconscious bond between them and the narcissist loses its pull. The empath stops reacting according to the narcissist's script. They stop over-explaining, stop over-healing, stop over-soothing. Their silence is no longer passive endurance. It becomes a space of recovery, a space that, for a long time, had been occupied by someone else's emotions. What's remarkable is that this awakening doesn't make the empath colder. It makes them clearer. This clarity changes their frequency, like an instrument finely tuned to the right pitch. And when the empath's frequency shifts, the narcissist feels it instantly. They feel their control slipping, even though the empath hasn't left or said goodbye. This is what terrifies the narcissist most, not losing the person, but losing the source. For the empath, this is the first time they feel themselves coming back home. Their body feels lighter after speaking the truth. Their mind feels clearer when they no longer have to decode someone else's moods. Their heart feels calmer when it no longer has to strain itself to regulate another person's chaos. This is the point where the contract starts to dissolve. Not because the empath decides to leave, but because their energy is no longer compatible with covert manipulation. The empath doesn't need to make declarations, doesn't need to explode, doesn't need to win an argument. Their awakening itself pushes away connections that do not belong to them. And that is the most dangerous silence for a narcissist, the silence that no longer carries pain, but understanding. Part 5. The breaking point. When the empath snaps inside, and the turning point begins. An empath's breaking point is unlike any other kind of emotional outburst people usually experience. It doesn't come from a huge argument, an obvious act of betrayal, or a shocking event that forces them to wake up. The empath's breaking point happens on the inside, quiet, soundless, yet powerful enough to change their entire psychological structure in a single, very brief moment. Before the breaking point, the empath is still trying to hold everything together. Even when exhausted, they still try to be kind. Even when drained, they still try to keep the other person stable. Even when their intuition sounds the alarm, they keep finding reasons to be understanding. They hope that their patience will somehow create a small miracle. But then one day, without any particularly dramatic event, they realize they no longer feel anything while trying to love, trying to understand, and trying to save. That moment is the internal snap. It doesn't hurt. It simply stops. A very strange stopping. The empath no longer feels pulled into the narcissist's emotional storm. They no longer feel they have to explain, no longer feel they have to soothe, no longer feel any drive to prove anything. They might still be standing in front of the narcissist, hearing them talk, watching them perform, but inside they have shifted into a different state, a state the narcissist cannot reach. This breaking point is not rebellion. It is depletion. A depletion of energy, but not a weak kind. It is a kind of enoughness, enough experience, enough lessons, enough understanding to know there is nothing left to hold onto. Jung called this moment the withdrawal of projection, when the empath pulls back everything they once projected onto the other person, the hope, the idealized image, the story they built, the belief in their potential to change. All of it returns, and when those things come back, the narcissist loses their most important resource, the narrative the empath once unconsciously maintained for them. The empath's internal breaking point is not a shattering. It is like a door in the mind suddenly opening and a sentence ringing out very clearly, very coldly, very calmly. I'm done. And with just that, the entire emotional matrix the narcissist constructed falls away like dust that can no longer cling to the mirror's polished surface. The empath no longer feels compelled to heal the other person. They no longer feel afraid of losing them. The most invisible cord that once held them, the tightest, the feeling of responsibility for someone else's pain, suddenly snaps. The most important thing about this breaking point is that it doesn't carry hatred. When the empath snaps, they don't want revenge, don't want to prove who is right or wrong, and no longer want the narcissist to understand them. Indifference begins to quietly seep into the heart, softly but very real. And indifference is something a narcissistic ego cannot tolerate. In the moment the empath snaps, their energy changes completely. It shifts from being open and absorbent to being transparent and impenetrable. Their energetic field returns to its original form, clear, elevated, and self-protective. The narcissist's words suddenly stop reaching them. The usual tactics, silence, sulking, blame-shifting, victim-playing, suddenly stop working. The narcissist senses this instantly, like someone standing before a flame and suddenly finding it extinguished without knowing why. The empath's internal breaking point is not a retreat, it is an energetic detachment. Their field no longer sticks to the other person. Previously, every word and gesture from the narcissist would make the empath ripple slightly like water trembling when a stone is thrown in. But from the breaking point onward, the surface becomes still. No stone thrown can disturb it anymore. When this state appears, the empath usually sees three truths that they hadn't been able to fully face before. First truth: they cannot save someone who refuses to save themselves. Second truth: love is not endless sacrifice. Third truth: they have lost themselves in the process of trying to keep the other person standing. These truths no longer cause pain. They bring clarity. And this clarity is the death sentence for the contract. After the breaking point, the empath doesn't necessarily leave right away, but they begin leaving from the inside. Layer by layer of energy, of illusion, of emotional attachment starts to fall away on its own. They become quieter, not a silence meant to punish or to attract attention, but a silence born from having nothing left to say. Everything that needed to be said has already been spoken through their energy. This silence throws the narcissist into panic. They sense control slipping away, but don't know how to get it back. The narcissist often reacts in many ways: erupting, love bombing again, playing the victim, shifting blame, but none of it reaches the empath anymore. Because the empath has snapped in a way the narcissist cannot undo. This is when the contract starts shaking the hardest. It doesn't shatter instantly, but it can no longer hold. The empath's awakening is the blade cutting through the rope that kept them bound, and the internal breaking point is the moment they finally lift that blade. From here, the empath's energy begins to return to its rightful place, back to themselves. And when the energy returns to its true owner, everything that once bound them to the narcissist begins to lose its power. That is the moment the narcissist can no longer control anything, and the moment the empath begins to reclaim their soul. Part 6. The dissolution. When the soul contract begins to disintegrate, and the narcissist loses power, when an empath snaps on the inside, the entire unconscious structure of the bond begins to shift, not loudly, not chaotically, but unmistakably and irreversibly. If before, the soul contract existed because the empath constantly responded, constantly adjusted, constantly absorbed and processed the other person's emotions, then now all of that machinery has been unplugged. The bond is not cut through words, it dissolves at its very origin, the energetic level. The dissolution doesn't happen like an explosion, it's more like a rope being cut thread by thread, until there is nothing left to hold the empath in place. The narcissist often doesn't notice this immediately. They only feel that something is off, a vague emptiness they don't know how to handle. In the past, whenever they sent out an emotional signal, anger, sadness, neediness, or a performative vulnerability, the empath would react almost automatically. Like someone who can't stand an off-key note and rushes to tune it, the empath always tried to restore balance. But now, all those signals suddenly fall into a void. No echo, no response, no ripple. And to the narcissist, that silence feels like a door that has been locked from the inside. The paradox is this: the narcissist believed they were controlling the empath, but once the contract starts dissolving, they can no longer read the empath at all. They are thrown off by this change. They try their usual tactics again: sulking, guilt-tripping, provoking, creating drama, playing the victim, then switching to let's start over. But none of it lands on the empath anymore. The empath's energy has become sealed, like a still surface of water that no longer reflects any outside disturbance. On a deeper level, something crucial happens. The energy flow reverses. For months, maybe years, the energy had been flowing in one direction, from the empath to the narcissist. But when the contract begins to dissolve, that flow stops, leaving the narcissist with a massive internal void, a void that had been filled all this time by the empath's empathy. This emptiness is exactly what they've always been afraid to face: their own hollowness, fragility, and lack of direction. Without the empath's light shining in, the narcissist begins to feel the weight of their own shadow again, the very shadow they had been projecting onto the empath. For the empath, the dissolution of the contract brings a very strange sensation: lightness without joy, peace without full comfort. It's like taking off a heavy backpack they've worn so long they forgot it was heavy. Once it's off, their back feels lighter, but their body needs time to adjust to not carrying it anymore. The empath doesn't feel like they've won, they feel like they've simply had enough. At this point, what changes most is not their emotions, but their awareness of boundaries. Boundaries are no longer something they try to build logically. They become the natural state of their energy. They no longer need to say, "I'm tired, I don't agree," or "I don't want to keep doing this." Their energy says it for them. The narcissist feels that wall, a wall that is invisible yet solid, built from consciousness, not from defensiveness. As the contract dissolves, the narcissist begins to experience what they fear the most: losing access to the empath's inner world. Before, they could manipulate their fear of abandonment, trigger their guilt, or confuse them into coming back. But now, those tactics don't stir anything in the empath. The empath sees them like a play that has been performed too many times. No anger, no confusion, just recognition. And recognition is what kills the contract. Not pain, not betrayal, not arguments. Recognition. That clear, emotionless seeing renders all energetic cords useless, like wires plugged into a socket with no power. Every manipulative tactic loses its plug-in point. For the narcissist, this creates an unconscious panic. They start to feel the empath slipping away, so they react in two directions, tighter or softer. Tighter means more control, harsher blame, more aggressive demands for emotional reaction. Softer means returning to the role of the wounded one, apologizing, acting kind, or suggesting a fresh start. But either way, they hit a new reality. The empath has closed the energetic gate. And when an empath closes that gate, no one can open it except them. The dissolution also shows up in a key behavior. The empath stops explaining. This is one of the strongest indicators that the contract is no longer functioning. The empath used to explain their feelings to keep the peace, to be understood, to avoid hurting the other person. But now, they no longer see any value in explaining. A simple sentence like, "I just don't feel this is right for me anymore," carries the weight of the whole healing journey because it shows that the empath is no longer seeking the narcissist's approval. During this dissolution, an important separation takes place. The empath begins to distinguish between which emotions are actually theirs and which emotions they were forced to carry. This awareness is like a light shining over the tangled cords that once bound them. Once they see clearly, they start untying each knot. Not in a rush, not in agony, just untying. The dissolution of the contract also brings another truth that the narcissist cannot bear. The empath no longer sees them as the center. Previously, they occupied the empath's mental space, intruded on their thoughts, took over their dreams and worries. But when the empath's energy returns to themselves, the narcissist disappears from that inner landscape, not because they are erased, but because they no longer have a role. This is a kind of symbolic death for the narcissist's ego. While the narcissist is in panic, the empath feels something entirely different. An inner space opening up. A space that is no longer reserved for the other person. It is for them. And when an empath first experiences mental and emotional space that truly belongs to them, they know they never want to trade it away again. Not for any price. This is the complete dissolution of the soul contract, when the empath no longer belongs to the story the narcissist created, and the narcissist no longer has the power to keep them in it. The door doesn't slam. It quietly slides shut without a sound, allowing the empath to step out of a world they lived in for far too long. Part 7. The silent exit. When the empath leaves in peace, and the narcissist falls into inner panic. When the soul contract has dissolved from within, the moment an empath leaves no longer requires declarations, no long goodbyes, and no final conversations to make things clear. They no longer want to prove anything, nor do they hope the other person will change. The empath leaves in the only way they truly can, through absolute silence, a silence that carries no anger, no regret, only clarity. And that clarity becomes the sharpest cut of all for a narcissist. The silent exit is not an act of leaving. It is an energetic state. The empath does not run. They do not hide. They simply leave. They leave the surface of the other person's emotional world. They leave the role they once unconsciously took on. They leave the emotional matrix they were once trapped in. They gather their energy back to themselves like streams of light slowly withdrawing from a dark room they have illuminated for far too long. For an empath, this departure feels as light as a breath, not because they do not hurt, but because they have already gone through a kind of pain they cannot afford to endure again. When they let go, it is a letting go paid for with their entire soul. And once the letting go happens, they don't look back. Not because they need to be decisive, but because there is nothing left for them to look for in that past. In that silence, there is something the narcissist never expected. The empath is no longer affected by them. They no longer react to blame. They no longer get pulled into drama. They no longer waver when the other apologizes or promises to change. All the tactics that used to work suddenly become meaningless. Not because the narcissist has changed their behavior, but because the empath no longer stands in the place where those tactics can land. A narcissist can tolerate rejection, anger, even being hated, because all of that is still reaction, still proof that they matter to someone. But they cannot tolerate emotionally neutral silence. That silence is not repressed rage. It is the empath having pulled back the energetic cord that once connected them. And for the narcissist, that is proof they no longer exist in the empath's inner world. That is what sends them into panic. This panic does not show itself in screaming. It shows up as psychological chaos. They feel restless without knowing why. They feel empty without knowing what they've lost. They feel they need the empath more than ever, but have no idea how to reach them. They don't miss the empath out of love. They miss them out of lack. Lack of reaction. Lack of reflection. Lack of the energy source that once nourished them. They are like someone who used to drink from a stream, convinced it would flow forever, only to return one day and find it dry. Meanwhile, the empath walks away with a new kind of peace, not the peace of victory, but the peace of release. They do not want revenge. They do not want comparison. They do not want to prove that they were right. They simply want to return to their own energy, which has been scattered for too long across emotional landscapes that were never theirs to hold. This peace is not instant comfort. It is like stepping outside after a storm. The air is still cold, the ground still wet, the trees still bent, but you know the sky has cleared. You know you will be able to breathe again. The empath rarely realizes that their silent exit is a tsunami to the narcissist. All the hoovering tactics begin to surface. Sudden apologies, long emotional messages, a return of the love-bombing phase, displays of vulnerability, even threats or guilt trips. But none of it reaches the empath anymore, because at this point, they are no longer seeking explanations or repair from the other person. They just want to leave without taking on any new wounds. What makes the empath's departure most powerful is the feeling of owing nothing. They no longer owe explanations. They no longer owe forgiveness. They no longer owe effort. They no longer owe hope. When an empath feels they owe nothing, their soul becomes so light that nothing can hold them back. The narcissist rarely understands this, because they live in a world where everyone must respond to them. But when the empath leaves in silence, the narcissist is forced to face a truth they have always run from. No one stays forever to endure them. In that state of silence, the empath doesn't need to declare an ending. The ending has already happened when they stopped synchronizing their energy with the other person. The space the empath steps into is not just freedom from the relationship, but freedom from someone else's ego. This is the deepest form of freedom a sensitive soul can reach. It is not flashy. It is not a neatly packaged life lesson. It is simply a return. When the empath steps out of the contract this way, they do not look back, not because they are cruel, but because they know that if they turn around, they will lose themselves again. They have learned that light cannot save darkness by dissolving into it. Light can only save darkness by remaining light. The silent exit, then, is not an ending. It is a homecoming, a return to instinct, to radiance, to the original inner self. And when the empath returns to their rightful energetic sovereignty, they begin the next phase of the journey, the rebirth. Part 8. The collapse, the downfall. When the narcissist loses the empath's energy source. The narcissist's collapse after the empath leaves is not a loud explosion or visible chaos that everyone can see. It unfolds quietly, like a building that still stands while its foundations have already been removed, causing each layer of brick to crack from within. At first, they don't notice anything unusual. They only sense more silence than usual, as if standing in a familiar room where, suddenly, the echo has vanished. In the past, every word, every expression, every tear from the empath triggered an immediate response, feeding their ego like a stream that never ran dry. But when the empath leaves in absolute stillness, all of the narcissist's signals fall into a void, and it is that void that makes their ego tremble first. The narcissist begins to notice something is no longer working. Messages go unanswered, calls are ignored, behaviors that used to provoke a reaction now produce none at all. No reaction means no power. And the loss of power is the first tremor of collapse. They become restless, irritable, like an addict deprived of their usual dose. The empath was the emotional supply they were feeding on every day, every hour. When that supply disappears, their energetic system goes into a kind of withdrawal. They feel empty, uncomfortable in their own skin, unmoored, with nothing to hold onto. As they try to regain control, they reach for familiar tactics, guilt-tripping, playing weak, appearing remorseful, even recreating intimate moments from the beginning to pull the empath back. But this time, everything crashes into an invisible wall, the wall formed by the empath's awakening.
With no emotional movement from the empath to latch onto, the narcissist starts to feel themselves slipping out of their own role.
For the first time in a long time, they are confronted with a question they don't know how to answer. Who am I when no one is reflecting me anymore? This is when their persona begins to crack. Until now, they have lived through carefully polished versions of themselves, charming, powerful, special, worthy of rescue. But when the empath no longer sees them through that empathic lens, those masks begin to fall, revealing the primal emptiness they've always tried to hide. If there is one feeling the narcissist fears most, it is this emptiness, the sense of not being enough, not being loved, not having inherent worth. The empath once unconsciously held the flashlight, illuminating the corners of that inner darkness just enough to help them avoid the truth. But when that flashlight goes out, the darkness surges in and covers their entire inner world. The collapse does not come from the empath leaving. It comes from the empath no longer reflecting them. There is no one left to blame, no one left to perform for, no one left to weave a beautiful story they can hide inside, no one left to anchor their sense of existence. Everything suddenly feels meaningless. In that free fall, they scramble to find new supply, to grab onto anything that can fill the sudden void. But no matter how eager the new supply may be, it never has the same energetic quality as the empath. The narcissist may keep finding new people, but those people only dull the craving temporarily. They can never replace the one who left, because the empath didn't just give them emotion. The empath gave them a version of themselves they liked to see. When they realize that new supply cannot repair the emptiness, they fall into a quiet kind of despair, a despair they will never admit. They begin to miss the empath, but it is not love they miss. They miss the feeling of existing through the empath's reactions. They miss feeling important, seen, forgiven, saved. When all of that disappears, they are forced to face themselves, and that is something they have never truly done. In that darkness, they recognize a truth they will never say out loud. The empath didn't leave because they were weak, but because they awakened. And that awakening is the fatal blow to the narcissist's ego, because it proves they no longer control anything. They didn't just lose someone who could love. They lost someone they cannot replace, the only one who ever saw them beyond the mask, who was more patient than any other source of supply, who gave them a kind of energy they will never find again. The final collapse comes when they understand the empath is not coming back, Not because they aren't good enough, not because the empath is seeking revenge, but because the empath has walked through a door the narcissist cannot enter, a door opened by awakening, boundaries, and the return to self. And once the empath steps into that new light, the old door closes on its own, without sound, without bitterness, just completion. The narcissist is left on the other side of that door, facing the void the empath once filled. That void is not simply the absence of a relationship, it is the presence of truth. And that truth, to their ego, is the greatest collapse of all. Part 9. The rebirth of the empath. The rebirth of an empath doesn't arrive with applause or explosive moments. It comes in silence, as gentle as the first breath of morning after a long, dreamless night. When the soul contract closes, their inner space suddenly becomes so vast that even they find it strange, like a forest that has just survived a fire. On the surface, only ashes remain, but beneath the soil, seeds are quietly preparing to break through. The empath stands in that emptiness with a feeling that is both peaceful and hollow, not because they have lost someone, but because for the first time they have themselves back. And it is within this space that rebirth begins to open its eyes. The first thing that returns is the breath. Not the breath of someone straining to endure, nor the breath of anxiety or of hoping someone will respond. One morning, they wake up and realize their chest feels wider. A soft exhale escapes so gently that they have to pause and feel where it came from. For the first time in a long time, they are breathing like a free human being, no longer carrying the breath of fear, no longer weighed down by emotions that aren't theirs. In Jungian language, this is the moment when prana, life energy, returns to its rightful owner. And when prana returns, the soul slowly realigns with its true orbit. Then the body begins to heal even before the mind. If before, the empath's body was always tense, always on guard, always ready to absorb the other person's emotional state like an open antenna, now the body starts to close the channels that once made them so vulnerable. Their shoulders sink, their sleep becomes deeper, their heartbeat finds its rhythm again, not because the wounds have disappeared, they are still there, but because the body has finally left the field of invaded energy. The body is the most honest entity. It knows when safety has arrived, and when the body recognizes safety, the soul is allowed to come home. From that physical sense of safety, intuition begins to awaken, no longer distorted by the chaos of the old bond. Empaths have always possessed strong intuition, but in a relationship with a narcissist, that intuition was buried beneath noise, artfully crafted lies, deliberate emotional swings, and chaotic signals that made them doubt themselves. When all the noise fades, their intuition rises immediately, like clear water freed from an obstruction. They no longer have to strain to find answers. The answers appear on their own, so clear they can't understand how they ever missed them. This is intuition refined through pain, sharper, deeper, and no longer seduced by illusion. Their energetic field also shifts in subtle yet powerful ways. If in the old relationship their energy flowed outward to absorb, now it begins to flow inward to nourish itself. This is the most important movement of rebirth, from being the one who receives other people's emotions to becoming the one who radiates from within. This light doesn't need anyone to see it. It is inner life returning after being compressed for too long. When that inner light stabilizes, they begin to walk with a kind of confidence that doesn't need to be proven in words. At the same time, new boundaries form not from logic or willpower, but from energetic frequency. Rebirth makes their energetic fields so full and solid that invasive energies can no longer reach them. They no longer have to struggle to say no. Their energy says it for them. Toxic people no longer feel comfortable coming close. Things that once shook them now fail to create a ripple. Boundaries are no longer a fence. They become a natural state. This is the stage Jung called the individuation of the aura, when the soul reaches a level of self-governance where it is no longer pulled towards someone else's darkness. When energy returns to its rightful owner, something beautiful and profound happens. Old passions come back like flocks of birds returning for spring. The things they abandoned while living in chaos, writing, drawing, dancing, studying, creating, exploring, begin to stir. Not because they want to prove to anyone that they're better now, but because a new current of life is flowing through them, urging them to become the version they were born to be. They want to go, to learn, to open up to themselves, to revisit the things that once made them happy. The seeds beneath the forest's ashes now begin to push upward, little by little, with no need to rush. Gradually, the empath looks at themselves and realizes that rebirth has not made them stronger in the way the world usually defines strength. Not stronger so they never feel pain. Not stronger so they never get hurt. Not stronger so they become cold. Rebirth brings them back to their true self, the version they were forced to abandon while living in a relationship with a narcissist. Rebirth is not about building a brand new person. It is about finding the old one, the real one, the one who was hidden beneath someone else's shadow for far too long. This is the deepest truth. They were never weak. They simply carried too much light beside someone who didn't know how to receive it. At this stage, the empath often goes through a strange yet profound moment, the moment of being unable to go back. Not because they're forcing themselves to forget, not because they're angry, not because they're afraid of being hurt again, but because their energy has completely changed frequency. The bond with the narcissist is no longer compatible. It cannot function in their new vibration. Apologies, beautiful memories, promises of change, all of it becomes ineffective. Not because they are heartless, but because they have become a different soul, larger, brighter, clearer. And then one day, standing before the mirror, the empath looks into their own eyes and recognizes something they have never truly seen before. They have returned. Not returned to who they were before meeting the narcissist, but returned as a version who has walked through darkness, understood ego, seen the limits of kindness, learned the language of energy, and now knows how to protect their light from dissolving into anyone else's shadow. It is a return crowned with sovereignty. Rebirth, therefore, does not mark the end of pain. It marks the end of the distortion that pain once created. This is the first time they walk without having to carry someone else. The first time they choose without being afraid of disappointing anyone. The first time they love themselves not as a concept, but as a felt reality. And when that happens, the empath's soul opens its eyes fully and steps into a journey no longer led by another's darkness, but guided by their own light. Part 10. The Sovereign Path. The Path of Sovereignty. The empath walks after rebirth. When an empath enters a state of true rebirth, their soul no longer looks for a way back to the past. It starts looking forward, as if the door of life has been opened one more time, but this time by their own hand, not by the pull of anyone else. The sovereign path is not a pre-drawn route. There are no signposts, no promises that everything will be okay. This path is like stepping into a land they have never walked before, yet somehow feels etched into their intuition from lifetimes ago. This is not a journey to become stronger. It is a journey to become who they truly are, before the world, the pain, or a narcissist forced them to shrink. Sovereignty begins very subtly, not with grand gestures, but with changes so small they almost whisper. They start saying no without feeling guilty. They start doing what they love without waiting for someone's permission. They start resting without needing to justify it. On the surface, these are simple actions, but on the energetic level, each one is a milestone marking the return of power once scattered in unworthy places. Each of these moments is like placing the first stones along a road they never had the chance to build before. Standing in sovereignty, the empath realizes something they once didn't dare accept, that life does not always have to revolve around healing someone. They once believed their existence was tied to soothing the pain of others. But in the rebirth phase, they understand that true healing doesn't come from holding someone else's darkness. It comes from not betraying the light within themselves. From this moment on, the empath no longer walks the path of the wounded healer, the one who heals while carrying open wounds, but steps into a new archetype, sovereign light. A light that is self-governed, non-dependent, non-addicted, non-manipulated, and no longer distorted by outside energies. On this new path, the empath begins to see the world through a level of awareness they never reached before. They can clearly see what is truth and what is illusion, what is real connection and what is clinging. They no longer mistake chaos for love, no longer see instability as passion, no longer treat carrying someone else's pain as their duty. Once the light has returned, they see everything in its true nature, and with that sight, they no longer fall into relationships that replay old patterns. This is when their soul finally completes a lesson it had never managed to finish across lifetimes. The sovereign path does not promise ease. The empath must face a new kind of loneliness, not loneliness from a lack of love, but loneliness because they no longer fit with those who once could drag them to the bottom. This is the loneliness of someone who has climbed to a higher level of consciousness and realizes not everyone can step up with them. But this loneliness doesn't weaken them, it clarifies them, clear like a body of water no longer muddied by others' footsteps. Clear enough that they can look straight down to the bottom of their own soul without fear. Then, at some point, the empath begins to attract new forms of energy, not through effort, but through the frequency they emit. When they stand in their sovereignty, they attract people who also move through life with healthy energy. These kindred souls are not drawn to their wounds or lack, but to the quiet strength they carry. This is a kind of love they have never known before. Love that doesn't come from need, but from freedom. Not from dependency, but from choice. Not from emptiness, but from fullness. This love doesn't erase their selfhood, it expands it. The empath also begins to realize that the lessons they went through were not meaningless. If old pain once made them shrink, then the sovereign path causes them to expand into the true shape of their soul. They become someone who can read other people's energy from a distance, distinguish between real need and subtle manipulation. They are no longer easily fooled by the soft appearances of darkness. The darkness that once confused them is now recognized instantly. This is not hypervigilance. This is illumination. So much light that darkness can no longer hide inside someone's charm or fragility.
When the empath stands in sovereignty, their light becomes a mirror light, forcing others to face themselves.
From here, they begin to live a life they never thought they could have. No longer afraid of losing anyone, no longer afraid of being misunderstood, no longer afraid of being abandoned. Because they understand now that the person who had the greatest power to abandon them was themselves when they walked away from their own soul to keep someone else comfortable. Now that they have returned, they will never abandon themselves again. This is the greatest pivot point on the sovereign path. The empath is now more loyal to their own soul than to any relationship. On this new journey, they begin to attract opportunities they could not see before because fear kept them blind. They pursue goals with a calm determination, no rushing, no extremes, no chasing anything that wants to control them. Every choice they make is guided by intuition, by clarity, by a sense of right frequency they learned after sliding through the darkness. They no longer try to blend into the crowd, they walk as if they are the path. There is a sacred moment on the sovereign journey that only those who have endured the darkness of a narcissistic relationship can truly understand. The moment they realize that their peace is not a gift, it is a right. They have paid for it with tears, with their soul, with forgiveness, with kindness, with sleepless nights, with endless self-doubt, with moments when they believed they were unworthy of love. Now that they have been reborn, they understand that peace is the reward of a soul that chose light over darkness. And as the empath walks the sovereign path, they carry a new kind of presence, steady, clear, deep, and light. No one can shake them using the old tactics of manipulation. No one can drag their energy down into chaos. No one can pull them back into the darkness they have already transcended. They do not fight the darkness. They simply no longer belong to it. The empath's sovereign path, therefore, is not a path of victory. It is a path of coming home. Home is not a place. Home is an energetic state. Home is where the soul is allowed to be itself without asking permission. Home is where the light is not dimmed, not distorted, not forced to shrink so someone else can feel comfortable. Home is where they can stand alone and feel lacking nothing. And when the empath finds home within themselves, they stop searching for it in anyone else. This is the sovereign path, the path an empath only steps onto after leaving the one who once led them away from themselves. A path where every step is a silent declaration. I return. I belong to myself. I shine. Not because someone sees me, but because that is my nature. And from the moment they step onto that path, life will never be the same again. Part 11. The higher alignment. When the empath enters a higher frequency, and life starts choosing them, not the other way around. When an empath has walked the full sovereign path and enters a state of deep purification, a quiet but powerful shift begins to take place in their energetic field. Others may simply see someone who is calmer, clearer, and less reactive than before. But on the energetic level, this is the moment when old structures within them collapse and new ones begin to form. They are no longer the one who runs toward the pain of others, no longer the one who assumes responsibility for all the chaos around them, no longer the one who shrinks themselves to soothe someone else. In this phase, the empath steps into a new frequency, a kind of vibration Jung would call inner integration, where all the previously fragmented parts are reunited in one continuous flow. And as their energy changes, life changes with it. This shift does not arrive with noise. It arrives through rearrangement. The people who once drained them gradually fall away, not because the empath pushes them out, but because their new frequency is no longer compatible with maintaining those bonds. In contrast, people they have never met before begin to enter quietly yet precisely, as if the universe is sending them at exactly the right moment. Encounters that seem coincidental carry a sense of rightness, no striving, no over-explaining. The empath begins to understand that at a higher frequency, they no longer have to chase relationships. They simply need to stay aligned, and what belongs to them will appear. In this state, the empath attracts souls of a completely different quality. People who are not looking for a place to dump their darkness, but a space to share their light. People who are not asking the empath to save them, but who want to build something meaningful together. People who are not drawn to their wounds, but to their clarity and balance. The empath was once used to meeting those who needed fixing. But at this stage, they meet souls who don't need to be fixed, only to be connected with. This is a new kind of alignment that only higher frequency can call in. It's not just the people who change. Opportunities change too. The empath begins to see pathways they never noticed before because they were too busy standing in the storm of others. Once the mind is free from confusion, they start listening to the inner guidance, a kind of ancient wisdom they had been cut off from during the narcissistic relationship. Their intuition becomes so sharp that they don't need to overanalyze. They know what is right the moment it enters their field. This is not vague sensitivity. This is the clear discernment of a matured soul. Jung called this the return of the self, the comeback of the original core self, powerful and directed. At a deeper level, The empath realizes they no longer vibrate with the old fear of abandonment or fear of being unloved. When these fears dissolve, they step into a freedom they've never had before. The freedom to choose, the freedom to leave, the freedom to tell the truth, the freedom not to please, the freedom to live according to their own frequency. And this very freedom makes them particularly magnetic to healthy souls.
From here, they enter a flow that only those who've walked through darkness can recognize. The sense that life is opening doors in front of them, step by step, as if they no longer have to fight to exist, they only have to be present.
But the most miraculous thing about the higher alignment stage is not whom they attract, it is who they become. When they are no longer distorted by the energy of others, the empath begins to reveal their true nature. Powerful intuition, deep emotional range, a sensitive heart with boundaries, and an almost instinctive ability to read energy. This is no longer the easily wounded empath. This is the empath who has integrated their own shadow, who knows how to use light to illuminate without burning out, who knows how to wield compassion without losing boundaries, who knows how to love without losing themselves. They become the version their soul has been waiting for all along. Standing in this frequency, the empath no longer sees life as a series of painful lessons. They begin to see it as an expansion of their being. Each challenge is no longer an attack. It is an invitation to step deeper into themselves. Each encounter is no longer a test. It is a mirror showing how far they've come. Each decision is no longer weighed down by fear of judgment. It is an opportunity to live in integrity with their soul. And this shift makes them radiate in a quiet but powerful way, a kind of light that doesn't make noise but travels far. At this higher energetic level, the empath also begins to understand that control is not the path to protection. True protection comes from clarity. Clarity about who they are, what they want, and what they will no longer allow. This frequency makes everything misaligned fall away from their life like autumn leaves at the end of the season. No conflict needed, no long explanations, no desperate holding on. Things simply fall away because they cannot exist in the light they are now emitting.
And then, a strange and sacred moment arrives. The empath realizes they are no longer looking for love the way they used to. They are love, not the kind of love that sacrifices self, not the kind of love that exists to heal someone,
not the clinging kind of love. This is the kind of love that flows from inner wholeness, a kind of energy that makes the right people feel invited and the wrong people feel unable to come close. This is the strongest natural protection there is, the frequency of truth. At this frequency, the empath becomes the rare kind of soul Jung once described in his private notes. One who has passed through their own darkness no longer belongs to the old world. They walk with a stillness that makes others feel safe, with a brightness that helps others see themselves, and with a sovereignty that makes others respect them. This is not the noise of power. It is the echo of a soul that has finally come home. The higher alignment is not the reward of the journey. It is the natural outcome of the empath no longer running from themselves. As they radiate a new frequency, life reorganizes, people reorganize, opportunities reorganize, and their soul finally stands in the position it was always meant to occupy. No longer driven by fear, no longer shaken by darkness, no longer controlled by unready souls. This is the moment when the empath doesn't just step into a new life, they step into a new frequency. And from this moment on, life no longer chooses lessons for them. They choose expansion. They no longer choose love out of loneliness. They choose love out of freedom. They no longer choose people who need them. They choose people who see them. They no longer choose the easy path. They choose the path that matches their frequency. This is higher alignment, the stage where the empath's soul is not only healed, but elevated. No longer searching for someone to belong to, they become the one that souls of the right frequency will